Oh yeah, the recording.
Yes. Okay, it's live.
All right, cool. So now we are officially being recorded. So this event will be recorded and also be on our YouTube channel. So if you or any of your friends or relatives can't make it, just feel free to send them the link. Um, so first of all, welcome everyone. This is Design Buddies, and we're an inclusive design community. Today we have Celia Hodan speaking, and she's going to give a talk about how to get into the UX, how to get into UX in the games industry. So we have a little test rules document. So sorry, I did not mean to do that. We have a little document here where Design Buddies is founded on a goal to connect and support designers. We create a place for belonging for designers from all backgrounds. So we offer mentorship events, clubs, portfolio reviews, resources, and more. We have over 30,000 members globally and growing. We've had over 50 events, including panels with industry leaders. So just some rules. Events are recorded. So by attending, you give us that consent. Um, Please feel free to engage in the chat. We will be posting links. Follow us on social media and join the DB community in the chat as well. So our really friendly mods will help out. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. And share takeaways on social media, tag Design Buddies if you want to be reshared, use hashtags. We will be including a networking sheet momentarily, so please don't post any of your portfolios or LinkedIn's. Save that for the networking sheet. That would be great. Thanks. Feel free to connect with each other through the networking sheet. We'll also have a question Slido, so a place where you can submit and ask questions. Feel free to use that when it's posted. If you have any questions during the talk, feel free to just post it on the Slido. First of all, enjoy and hop into our Discord community to join making new friends and continue the conversation. We'll also have a group photo towards 10 minutes, about 10 minutes before the event ends. And one last thing, stay tuned because coming up after this event, we'll be having the game jam kickoff. So please stay tuned for that. And after the kickoff, we'll have another speaker an hour afterwards. So we're excited to see what you guys have to create during the game jam, and we thank you all for being a part of DB. And without further ado, Celia, feel free to take the stage.
All right. Well, hi everyone. I'm super happy to be here with you today. I didn't prepare too many slides because I really want this to be more like a conversation. I was asked to talk about how to get into game UX, to talk a little bit about how I got into game UX, which is, was a while ago now. So it's probably, I'm not sure if it's that relevant, but I will just do it anyway. So I just prepared a few slides. If you want to ask questions in the chat as I'm showing the slides, feel free. There's different sections where you might have specific questions, so feel free to do that. But my goal is to not spend too much time with the slides and then answer all of your questions. So, but if you have questions about the slides, then feel free to ask me anytime. So for those who don't know me, my name is Celia Hodan. I have a PhD in psychology. I'm French. I've been working in the video game industry for the past 13 years. I'm going to explain my career a little bit just so that you see the beats that can help you. I don't know. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter. This is mostly the channel that I use to meet with other people. I love LinkedIn, but mostly Twitter. And I have a blog. You can check out my stuff there. So yeah, so the first step in my career was my PhD in psychology. So I'm just going to show you a little bit very quickly the different steps, and then I'm going to explain a bunch of things that maybe is relevant. So I hope it's going to be relevant for you. So I got my PhD in psychology in 2004. Then I started to work actually in the toy industry. I worked at VTech in France, and I was so working with so they make educational toys, and so I was working to make the adaptation for French children, so to make sure it was adapted to the curriculum in French schools, for example. So that was interesting, but it's a little bit frustrating because this is where I realized that it's hard to make educational games, but there's not necessarily a big incentive to really focus on what's going to be truly educative for kids, because parents are going to buy whatever toy that says that, yeah, you train your kid about the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. So it's very hard for parents to understand, really what's really useful to educate their kids. And on top of that, any toy by definition is educational by itself, because children learn a lot through play. So anyway, I'm just not gonna spend a lot of time talking about this, but this is where I started to explore a little bit video games, because VTech was doing like some very simple video games for educational video games for kids. So this is where I was like, oh yeah, this is fun. And I grew up with video games. So it's not just I did not discover video games. I discovered working a little bit on the other side. And so this is when I was like, oh, maybe, my background could be interesting. So this is when I started to work at Ubisoft at HQ. So I was working with the Strategic Innovation Lab and sort of a think tank. And so we were exploring a bunch of questions. I also worked with the editorial team there. And this is where I started to make some training sessions to explain how the brain works, because that's my background. And then I moved to Ubisoft Montreal. This is where I really started to work directly on the production. Before that, I was working with a lot of different people on a lot of different games. So I really touched on a lot of different stuff, but I was not directly working on a production. At Ubisoft Montreal, I worked directly in production. So I was working at the Playtest Lab. So again, I was working a lot on different franchises, but more specifically, I was embedded into the Rainbow Six franchise. And then I moved to LucasArts in San Francisco. This is the first time I really had UX in my title, although I put UX in my title myself. I was hired as a game designer. I was like, what the hell? I'm not a designer and certainly not a game designer. So I named myself a UX lead there. So UX was still not really a thing. And then LucasArts shut down because it was bought by Disney. This is when I moved to Epic Games. And I became director of UX there. I left in 2017 and I became an independent freelancer in UX strategy. And today I live in Los Angeles, California. So my background really was super useful. I really had no plan whatsoever to work in the video game industry. I always loved games. So I guess, I got that going for me. I was always fascinated by so music and games were like the things that I love to do on my free time. So when I was a kid, same thing. Science was also a big one. So I guess, everything, my career makes sense because it's like everything going together. And so after my PhD in psychology, I studied cognitive development. So how children learn and how they get to understand numbers. That was more specifically, my thesis was about this. So that taught me about the brain and mental processes. And I had no idea that this would lead me to UX, because I had no idea that UX was a thing back then. So yes, I've heard of ergonomics, but it was not, it's a bit too far away. I was really thinking I would be a researcher, as I would research child development. But then it felt a bit rigid. I love science, but it felt there was a lot of politics in science. So today I'm really excited because I see a bigger push for open science. I think if that push existed back then, maybe I would have stayed in research. But I felt it was a lot of politics. So I'm not sure. So this is when I started to see, what can I do with a PhD in psychology? It's like very academic profile. I was doing research like with kids and how they learn and how they understand numbers. And this is how I ended up finding a job at VTech. It took me nearly a year to find a job, because I was like, it can be really hard when you come from academia to make that transition to corporate job, and you really have to learn how to make yourself more approachable to explain what you can do and what you can provide. So that taught me a lot. Like I said, it was a bit frustrating. Um, yeah, because I felt that there was not enough focus on really the truly educational part. And so in a sense, I was also very interested about how to make the best toys for the kids so that they had fun, and on top of it they also learn more stuff. And so at that time, so that was back in 2005, I think. I started to write. So in the meantime, a lot of things happened together. I think already as I was doing my PhD, I was writing articles because I was also very interested into making science approachable to everyone. And so I love writing about stuff about what I learned in my PhD and research in terms that can be understood by everyone, and so that people can be hyped by science. And so I wrote a lot of little articles, and I also read a lot of books and wrote some reviews of books around cognitive science. And so I think it was around that time when I started to work at VTech. And VTech had some video games, like was the V Smile console game. And this is when I realized that a lot of parents were afraid of video games, and that was news to me because I grew up playing video games and playing a lot of different games with my parents. That was part, it was like a video game was just considered just like a board game, just like cards game or dice game. It was all games. And so there was no like, oh, video games are like the bad games, whereas like playing chess is the good game. Was not that at all in my family. It was like any game was a good game as long as we had fun and we can play together. So that was really I asked myself, why is this, what's wrong with video games? And so this is when I started to research the academic part of video games. If people are afraid of video games, is this true? Is there some truth behind video game can entice violence? Video games can make people be like more inside their own thing and cut away from social activities. It was the main fears were around this, or make yourself being turned into someone stupid because you're it's melting your brain, whatever. It was not really a lot around addiction back then. It was more around violence and isolation, social isolation, and becoming dumb. So I was like, I'm like, that sounds weird, but when you care about the research, you don't rely on your opinion and your gut feeling. You look at the research. And so this is when I started to write about video games and say, hey, actually the research says that there's doesn't seem to that all the stuff that you're saying that video games do doesn't seem to be really the case. But yes, if you already if you fail at school, you might want to play more video games to escape, or if you're depressed. So there was some sort of things that games can be used as escapism. So then, that's the reason why we say correlation is not causation. If you see kids that are isolated that play more games, is it because they play games that they become isolated, or because they already are depressed and feeling isolated that they found solace in games? And so there's a lot of problems where people not understanding correlation and causation. And so I started to write about this. So I wrote a lot of articles back then. There's no blogs. It was not as common as it is today. Internet was there, of course, but YouTube was just starting. So that's just to give you a little bit of an idea of how it looked like back then. That's the reason why I'm not sure my experience can really be helpful, because it was very different back then. But by writing and being part of the conversation, explaining stuff to people, this is when I started to get more interested into the video game industry. And at some point I was like, man, this is really fascinating. I really love to work in the game industry, more specifically, like really in game studios. And initially I thought I would just like work there for gamification or, serious games, because serious games, there was a big boom back then, serious games. And this is how I got into Ubisoft. They were interested into people understanding kind of science. I was interested into the game industry, and we kind of met there. But it's thanks to the fact that I wrote a lot of articles. I was going to conferences there. It was really hard. I fought to be able to present some stuff around video games and child development, to explain to parents, hey, sure, you should not let your kids play all day long, and sure, they need to sleep and they need to do a lot of different other activities. But other than that, there's no reason to fear video games. And so this is by me doing all these things that I ended up getting that job at Ubisoft, because they were looking for someone also doing that sort of things. And also at that time, they were more into series games. They had that was the time of the DS. They had that line called, I think they still do, Games for Everyone. And they had a few games that were about my SAT coach and my word coach. So SAT is like the big exam in the US to graduate. So there were a lot of stuff like this. So that helped me for this, having that scientific approach, understanding science, being able to, so this is my thesis, it's not really irrelevant, but, understanding how the brain function, the mind function, how does that all mean, and explaining stuff to people in a easy way. I mean, in a way that's approachable, that really helped me out first to understand what was, why people are talking about video games in that way, and try to dissect the research about it, and then to make that bridge with the game industry. Because I thought that, hey, look at that, who thought that science could be used for games? So at that time, I did not even know that UX was a thing still. But I still had that understanding that if you want to make a game that's going to improve people's lives, beyond just the entertainment, you do need to understand these things and how the brain learns and all that. So this is how it all started. And then I started to talk about, then I started to work with people there in the game industry, not just for serious games, but also for any game, because turns out that's useful for anyone who make anything, to understand how the brain works, because you need to onboard people and to understand how that works, how the game works, or whatever, anything works. And this is when I started to, so I read a lot of books. This is when I discovered Donald Norman's, like, oh my God, this is what I'm doing. It's applied cognitive science. So I've heard of it before, but this is when all the pieces really came together. And this is when I really move into the UX world. And so it started fairly far away, but then what really helped me in my career and to do the job I'm doing today, that a lot of people say, oh, it's my dream job. That's pretty cool, I have to admit. And it's really at the intersection of all the things I love, art, science, and games and entertainment. It's because I was really curious about all the things, and the job I have today, didn't really exist, at least not in the game industry, and I didn't know about it. So it's possible that at some point things are going to evolve again, and new jobs are being created. So be very mindful of that, and be curious, because making those bridges is really an important part. I have the feeling sometimes that I got in a place and say, this is the job I want to do. And they're like, is this useful? And yes. And then I try to convince people to get there. So that a bit of what happened at LucasArts, like people only hired me as a game designer. Like, I'm not a game designer. Okay, let me tell you what I'm doing. And this is what I'm going to do. So sometimes you have to get in there, but by being curious and try to understand where people are coming from, what they need, really having a UX process, understanding your customers and your users, this is, how you can get there. But it took a long time. Like I said, I really started, I had my PhD in 2004. I started to work in enterprise, I think it was I think it was about the same time. No, it was month after. Yeah, it was a 9 month after, I remember. So it's been like a long time. Anyway, so over 15 years. So that takes a while. And so then at Epic, I was able to really boot the UX initiative, become the director of UX, create like playtest labs, and everything came together. And of course, I became more known for my work on Fortnite. But I did not just work on Fortnite, but Fortnite really blew up. And so the other thing that really helped me in my career. So yes, Fortnite I did not expect that at all. I left Epic right at the moment where Fortnite was starting to get a bit popular, but it was not crazy yet. But then it completely blew up. But as I was at Epic, there are several things I also did. So first of all, I wrote a book. It's just like, in retrospect, like, how the hell was I able to write this at the same time as I was working at Epic and on Fortnite? That was really important, because that brings credential to what you're doing, and putting all together the work that it was like the past 10 years that I work in the game industry. At that point, this is where I put all the stuff, because I kept doing training sessions. I kept training people about cognitive science, what it means for games, what it means for onboarding, and applied all that more specifically during my work at Epic. So before that as well, but at Epic I stayed longer. It was not sold like LucasArts, so it was not shut down. So I had the time to do more stuff and apply all these things, and making it into a book that was really useful. But before having a book, you can have blog posts, and just like, if there's something that you put together, a new methodology that's useful, or just simply explaining things and rapid. There's nothing uninvented in that book. It's just like, I'm wrapping things up in a way that I know is going to be useful for the game industry, because I've been working for so many people. So this is why that was super useful for me. The other thing that I did as well is to organize the Game UX Summit while I was at Epic. It was something that Epic was excited about, to talk about UX, and not just having me. I was excited about that because I didn't want to be the only UX representative there and says, hey, I built a team and this is, UX is what I say it is. No, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that that's bigger than me. That just went, at the service of UX. Other people are there. And that was really, really cool to put that together. It was really in the spirit of community. So there was already the GER Summit that's been there for years. But what I was trying to do is to really, again, make these bridges and bring this to the companies. And that's the reason why the Game UX Summit is always organized by a different company. So it started at Epic and then moved around, and it was organized by Ubisoft Toronto, and then by EA Vancouver, and then in France. And next year, crossing fingers, is going to be at Bungie. That's really, again, the idea of building bridges. So if there's one silver lining or one like commonality, my career is always about building bridges. And that love of teaching and trying to explain things and give away ingredients, like I say, so that people can make their own recipe and make sure that they can become autonomous and appropriate all this stuff. So now, more concretely, I already talked too much than I thought. I hope this is useful. I'm not sure, because today things have changed a lot, and UX is a thing in the game industry. Like when I started, it was not a thing. So depending on what sort of role you're interested in. So right now in the game industry, these are the main roles. So designers, researchers, data analysts, although data analysts oftentimes are more the service of business intelligence than UX, but you have, there are data analysts that really are here to help with UX questions and strategy. There are more UX roles than this, but they are not super common yet in the game industry. So depending on where you want to, if you're more into design, more into research, a strategy is more something that you get later in your career, and you can get there no matter where you come from. but you can have a different approach. So now this is where I'm going to give you some specific tips to help you get into the game industry. Just so you know, I will share the link with you after I'm done with that presentation, but I wrote a very long blog post. That's not super usable, I have to admit. I have the time to make it better, but I dumped a ton of information on my blog. You will find this. And so this is just a high level summary of all that. But just a few tips. So first of all, on your resume, I run a few sessions oftentimes to give feedback on people's resume. And when I was working at Epic or Lucas, I spent a lot of time looking at resumes to hire people. One of the things, put it all in one page. We don't have a lot of time to skim through resumes. The more summarized it can be, and especially in UX, you're here to make complex information digestible. Especially if you're a UX designer, you have to make your resume digestible as well. So make sure it's in one page. Make sure you customize it for the job description. Don't have like a blank resume that you send to everyone. Look at the job description, look at the studio, what sort of games they make sure that you highlight the key things that are going to be useful for the studio. Be mindful that more recently in the past years, now a lot of, not everyone, but a lot of companies are using an ATS algorithm to skim through resumes. So because of this, make sure, so Word format is going to be better for this, or PDF. You have to look it up because I don't remember actually what is the best way. Be careful with if you have a format that is a bit weird, or if it's a JPEG or something like that, that's not gonna work well. And also, this is the reason why make sure that you have some keywords there. So sometimes it can be annoying as a human when you read and you see all the keywords are there, but okay, so they put all the keywords there, but is it really telling me what they can do? But more recently now, I'm changing my tips. I'm saying, well, you do need the keywords just because of ATS, because they're looking for specific keywords. So be mindful of that. There on my website, I link on certain resumes so you can take a look at when a standard resume can you look like. Mention your overall aspiration. Always start with statement of what you care about, and not care about providing direct experiences to people. That's a bit blunt. Try to be more specific. What you care about, like what sort of games or what sort of stuff that you're really into. And make sure that you put all your XP, so if you have professional experience, this is really what we care most about, unless it's not relevant to the job you're applying for. So put that first, then your personal projects or student projects, make sure you highlight your skills, the tools that you know. Don't put all the tools in there. I mean, like some people like put Microsoft, MS, Microsoft Office. That's too broad. So for example, if you are a system designer, or if you're an analyst, do mention what like Excel, like you can excel in Excel, for example. That's something that you need to say. Prototyping tools. So mention the ones that you're really comfortable with. Again, like here, this is not, the idea is not to have like a list of all the things, but depending on the job you're applying for, what are the relevant tools for that job, and make sure that if you're comfortable with this tool, put in there. And the skill, same thing. For example, in research, don't say just research. You can say, well, card sorting. You can list the methodology that you're really comfortable with. Again, don't list everything. List the ones that are really have experience in and are comfortable doing. You can also give you a background, of course, and that's going to be very relevant, especially for research roles. It does help to have not necessarily a PhD, but at least experience in research, because that takes a while to really understand biases and do proper research. So a lot of time today, we have a tendency for research, not for design, to hire people who have a research background. So at least that went to a university or to a place where they did research and they learned how to do research. And lastly, explain what games you're playing. Oftentimes we have resumes and it's for a video game industry, and we don't know if you're playing games or if you just like games, but we do need to understand what sort of games you're comfortable with. If you apply to a company where they do a lot of RPGs, like mentioned that you play a lot of RPGs, it's actually really useful for us to understand why you're applying to the video game industry. So everybody is going to say that they're passionate about games. So that's not really going to help you if you just say, oh, I'm passionate about games. But if you don't say anything about games, it's really not helping you either. So talk a little bit about games, say the games that are maybe the genre that you like to play, or the ones that you're most familiar with. So that's for the resume. Then for portfolio website, if you're a designer, you need a portfolio. If you have no professional experience, do some exercises, like take a game that you love playing and think about, oh, I actually had some usability issue with that game. Let me try to redesign something. Could be the HUD, could be a system, the crafting system. So just mention that this is just an exercise, that you're, of course, you do not know the constraints of the game developers. Make sure you're humble and say, oh, this game is shit, let me fix it. That's not going to sound good. So as long as you express that you understand that there are limitations, a constraint that you're not aware of, this is just an exercise that I wanted to do this, and have different exercises like this for different type of games on different platforms. As much as possible. For research, we typically don't have a portfolio, especially a lot of stuff is under NDA, but you can have a website, you can have a blog where, again, like games that you love playing, you can say, hey, let me do an exercise and do a heuristic evaluation. Again, if you don't do a real test, a user test, and it's a heuristic evaluation, mention that you're aware of the limitation and it's just an exercise for you. Stay humble again, because otherwise that's not going to read well. But be out there, produce things. Like it was true for my career. Like even though back then, I didn't have a website, it was a bit more complicated to put the website together. I was out there. I was producing stuff. I was writing articles. So do the thing that you like to do, but be out there, like have a voice somehow and produce things. Then if you get that interview, prepare for it. I had a lot of interviews where the student or the applicant actually did not know much about the studio, did not even play the games while the games were free to play. So, sometimes when the games are paid, can be difficult. So you can ask, sometimes you can ask, if the games are expensive, you can ask for a key for it because you would love to play it, to prepare the interview. Or you can watch videos, like you can go on Twitch and watch, people play the game, know the games from this developer, know what they're about, know what they're doing. Because it's not a good look if you arrive and you're like, oh, what games you're making. It doesn't seem that you're really interested into being a member of the studio. And if you ask questions, prepare questions. It's also oftentimes, it's not a good look when we typically at the end of interviews say, do you have any questions for us? Ask questions, because you are supposed to have questions. So this means that you research the studio, but it's also really important for you to ask the questions that's going to matter. Ask about the work-life balance, ask about mentorship opportunities, ask about diversity, ask about inclusion, ask about accessibility. All these things are actually really important to know before you get into a job. Now, the more junior you are, the harder it is to ask this question. I totally get it. So you have to weigh what you're comfortable doing, but also be careful to not get into a job where you're going to be exploited. And because sometimes we work years on a game that actually is canceled. So if on top of that you had a really bad experience and you were exploited and you didn't learn enough, that's not good. So be careful with that. I know it's hard. You need a job, you need money, and you need experience. Without experience, you can get a better job. But be mindful that you should not take crap just because you're a junior. So there's a balance here that you need to be aware of. If you do a design test, so that's more specifically for UX designers, oftentimes we ask people to do a test so that we can see their thought process. The test should not be taking you days of your life. It's just an exercise so that we can talk about your thought process. So be careful if the employer is asking you like to do something that's going to take you really long time. That's not a good sign. But it's a good practice to do a test, because then we can really look at objectively, what the candidate is producing. And then what's going to be really important is not to say, okay, so I did this and I did that. So you asked me, for example, to redesign a crafting system for a game. And okay, I did this and this is my design. We're not as interested into this as of why you make these decisions. So if the people who hire you know about UX, we care about, there are many different ways to solve a problem, but what we care about is why did you take these decisions based on what assumptions you have from the players and what issues and problems you're trying to solve for them. So you have to mention your assumptions. And yes, there are many things you don't know. You don't have any insight on what are the personas for the game. You don't have access to players. You don't have tools, or you don't have any of these resources. But this is just an exercise. So you can say, these are the assumptions that I made for this task. Now, of course, in real life, I would have spent a lot of time with the stakeholders of this feature, try to understand what this is for. I would spend time to understand the players and the persona, et cetera, et cetera. But then this is how you can explain, I make this design decision, assuming that this is what players want to do, and this is how I would solve the problem. And so then the conversation is interesting, because then we can ask, okay, and so why did you go that route rather than that route? If you can explain why this is what's going to matter in your design test. So don't, be prepared to not just showing the final design. This is not as interesting as your thought process, which is also what should be in your portfolio. And last little tip that I want to give you, it's network. Like I said, find your voice, find mentors, watch conferences, be part of the community. So Design Buddies is a great example of that. So it's great that you're here. This is extremely useful to be part of a community. And yeah, so network. So my weapons of choice for networking are Twitter and LinkedIn, but I'm not a designer. There's also a lot of other channels that you can use to be part of a community, and Slack and Discord and all these channels are really useful. But make sure also you're not staying just in one channel, because a lot of recruiters and older people like me are the ones that are recruiting. They're mostly on LinkedIn and Twitter. In the game industry. So yes, definitely reach out to communities, and you will find a lot of UX designers and UI designers on Discord. I would say this is the place where they are, but there's a lot of UX professionals on Twitter. There's a lot of discussions happening there, and also be where the recruiters are, not just recruiters are not that much on Twitter. They're mostly on LinkedIn. So make sure you have a good window on what you're doing there so that you can build the bridges. So it's important to find the channels where it's good for you to grow and to find mentorship. And that might not be the same channel where you are out there, open to the world, and you need both. Yeah, that's it. And defend the UX pillars. I know it's getting, it's hard, especially when you're junior, like people ask you to do something that's going to increase the business, but not necessarily going to increase the experience for users. So I'm not saying that you should get out there all the time. But keep that in back of your mind. And when you have enough power, defend the UX as a mindset that is benevolent. We care about people. I just reacted on someone on Twitter saying that UX is not as much as improving people's lives with technology. It's about convincing stakeholders that it's good for business. I'm like, no. This improving people's life with technology, improving people's fun with our games is our main role here. And yes, it goes with in convincing stakeholders that on long term it is going to be much better for their business. But this is not our goal. Our goal is to be benevolent and be human centered. We are on the side, we fight for the user. And so, ethics, it's increasingly important in questions around accessibility, inclusion, and good design practices are more important. So I totally understand that it's not as a junior that you can be that voice, so you have to be careful there. But do find people that can back you up, and once you have a bigger platform, make sure that you defend these pillars, because it's important. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing this. I'm gonna answer all of your questions. Well, look at that. I thought those would just last 25 minutes. I guess I'm really too chatty. It's like, oh yeah, I love talking about myself. So here's the link. I put the link in the chat for the tips that I wrote down on my blog. What are your
Thank you
questions?
so much, Celia, and we really enjoyed your talk and for sharing your link as well. So we'll just dive straight to questions now. This is on Slido from Anonymous. Has upvoted a question. Hi, what do you think we should prioritize when building a UI UX portfolio for the gaming industry?
So prioritize games. So if you're not in the game industry, I have experience outside of the game industry, that's definitely going to interest recruiters still, because we have an increasing need for UX designers in the game industry, and not a lot of UX designers specialize in games. So it's still valuable, but make sure that you show that you play games somehow in your portfolio. And I would say, like, even if you have experience outside of the game industry, do an exercise related to games. So that's going to be really important, because what's really different in the game industry than UX for tools is that we need to make people have fun. And so yes, we're solving problems for users, but we need to understand the mechanics, the different systems, and how games are working. So you need to make sure you can translate this knowledge for game developers. But for the rest of it, it's just same as any industry. Of course, you need to show you can have like snippets over the different stuff you want to show in your portfolio, so that it looks slick and it's not going all over the place. And on one pager, you have an understanding of all the different skills that you have. And then we can click on the different projects. And then on different projects, what's going to be really important is that you show what was your role on this project, what you're trying to do, what were the constraints, what problems you're trying to solve for the users. And then you can show the final design. You can start there, but then make sure that you describe all your different steps, show the sticky notes, like stuff like this, like the whiteboard, all that. Like, people love to see that, and they want to see your thought process and how you solve problems, and why did you make these design decisions, because we care. This is what we care about, not really the final design itself, but why is this the best solution for your users, for what you're trying to solve for them. So that's going to be really important. Don't shy away of showing your process. The difficulty is just to make sure that it looks good and that people can understand the different stuff. So you can do like the zoom out, zoom in, like you have like an overview when people, like, in just one glance can see everything. Because just like resumes, like, people don't spend too much time looking at portfolios. They will dig in if they're interested, but you need to grab their attention. So you need to have a nice overview. This is what I do. It's all the beautiful, cool stuff. And then you click in and then you see more. This is all the different steps I did and then you can dive in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. But talk about games. Like, if you want to apply in the game industry, we need to see games, and we need to have confidence that you understand what we need to do in games.
you, Celia, for your very thorough answer. So, next question is, what are some common interview? It's also from anonymous. What are some common interview questions and requirements to get hired into a UX position in the gaming industry?
Common questions in the game industry: what games you're playing. That's a common question. It could be, what did you think about our game? And they might want to make sure that you play the recent games. They might ask you a question about if there's a new UI trend on your interaction design that was interesting. Like when Destiny came out, you definitely need to understand what is the implication of the virtual cursor. That's a good example that really was a game changer, and everybody was looking, okay, what is that going to do? Are people going to love it, hate it? What are the pros and cons of having a virtual cursor on console? That's the sort of thing you need to know and be ready to answer for. That's the reason why you need to have a good culture of games. You don't necessarily need to be passionate about games and to play games all the time. But just like anything else, you need to be, if you're a professional in a sector, you need to understand a little bit where we're at and where the new stuff going on. And because if you can't answer these questions, it's going to be difficult. So I would say that's the main questions. And then, then you have the interviews, like questions that you have, like the classic stuff, like people are going to say, what is your main strength and your main weaknesses. We ask this because we want to make sure that you're aware that no one's perfect and that you're aware of your limitations. So it's typical same questions you can have for any job. So the main difference is you have to have a good culture in games and around UX. So whether it is on the research side, on the design side.
So Pia has a
So
follow-up.
I see the follow-up question. It is important to have played their games. If you go into in an interview and you really want to get the job, you need to understand who they are. So do some research. I'm not saying that you play all of their games, but at least take a look at what games they've been doing in the past. What is the game they're currently making? What engine are they using? That sort of things that could be really useful. Yes, get interested into their games, how they were claimed or not by people. So again, you don't have to. The idea is not to become an ultimate fan of this studio, but you do need to do a little bit of research so that you can prove that you're interested into the job. And ultimately, this is how it's actually a good practice. Even if you don't get the job, it's still going to be good that you know more studios and you understand like more challenges for the next interview.
So Surya briefly mentioned game engines, and the next question from Anonymous says, I've applied to a few UX roles, and sometimes they ask me about my Unity background. How important is it to know Unity 3D when doing UX in the gaming industry?
So in the game industry, I would say sad. I want to say sadly because it should not be the case, but sometimes they do ask you. So they don't necessarily ask you to be really proficient in either Unity or Unreal Engine, but it can be useful if you can do a few things and tweak things here and there. Because even when you get the job, even if they don't ask it, it's still going to be useful for you to be able to tweak a few things for yourself. Now, I disagree that UX designers should be the ones implementing everything. That's why we have a design phase and implementation phase. But it's useful to have at least some notions. That would be good. If you can, not be super proficient in Unity or in Unreal Engine, but at least, understand how it works and how you can do things in there.
I think we have time for maybe a couple more before we do the group photo. So this one is a loaded one from Anonymous. Is working in the gaming industry as toxic as rumors make it out to be, such as overworking employees, widespread misogyny, etc.?
Yes. Sorry. It's everywhere. It's pernicious. It seems to be getting better. So to be honest with you, I did not feel it that much at the beginning. But because when you're a junior, you don't feel it that much. There's definitely some weird stuff when you're a woman. That's for sure. Now I'm white, so I did not feel any discrimination there. But certainly that's a thing. Also, as you know, and it's there in the game industry, definitely. Now I felt it way more as I became more senior, because then you hit the glass ceiling, and that's getting obvious. But yeah, it's there, and that's the reason why it's really important to have a strong community, to help each other out. It's getting a bit better, but it's everywhere. It's in the AAA studios, it's in the indie studios, it's everywhere. So that's the reason why I told you, ask questions and make sure that you're not stepping into a toxic environment that's really going to take a huge toll on you. So do ask these questions, ask, look around, like, or already, who have a seat at the table. If you only see white guys, it's not a good sign. There should be diversity there. So that's the reason why you should ask these questions. Try to ask them in a way that you're not like being like judgmental, but at the same time, we need to get this moving and changing in the game industry to make sure that everyone is included. So inclusion, that's why Ethical Games is the initiative that I started. It's not just about making sure the games are more inclusive for the players. It's also to make sure that the game industry is more inclusive to workers. And it goes hand to hand. And so we need to challenge the status quo in both ends of the, both sides. So yeah, no, it's not great. I'm not gonna lie. Also, I'm really happy being a freelance today, partly for this reason. But it's getting better, and yeah, definitely are some lovely people out there. So the team you're gonna be working with is more important than the studio. Sometimes the studio has a good reputation, but then you get into a team that is not great, and sometimes vice versa. So ask about the people you're going to work with. You should be meeting them in the interview process. If not, ask to meet them. Ask about, who's going to be your direct manager, and make sure that this person is already, if that person is already asking you creepy questions, like that's a flag.
Yeah, definitely don't want to have red flags during interview. I really agree with everything that you said there. It's a big problem, and not just gaming, but a lot of other issues as well. But hopefully, over time, like, we can all work together to eradicate as much as possible. So the last question is from Hannah. What are some credible resources for one to learn more about the psychology of games that can also be reflected on a resume or portfolio?
So, sorry, resources about the psychology of games that should be reflected? Not sure I understand the question, actually.
What are some credible resources for one to learn more about the psychology of games, which can be reflected on a resume or portfolio?
So all the resources related to games and psychology are already listed on my resources page. I do, so not all of them. I know that there are some books that I should add. But I read all the books before putting them in. So sometimes I know they're valuable, but I haven't read them yet. So that's the reason why it's not there. But most of the resources are there. So psychology of games, you have more people now that talk about this. You have also a lot of associations. So if you go to ethicalgames.org, so this is the stuff about ethical games, there's a page listing a bunch of associations and orgs that are about communities. So you can also get there. You have way more communities now talking about psychology of game. Like take this org as an example of that, and way more associations that try to address problems, like Raising Good Gamers is another example of that. So it's not just about the books that you can read, and they're getting more and more books. That's why I'm having a hard time following up now and adding them on my website. But about the psychology of games, more specifically, there's not a lot in UX of games. Yes, definitely, the game user research book, and there's a few books out there, but it's not a ton. So that's why I felt compelled at some point to write a book. Because I thought, like, wait a minute, there's stuff in there, but not enough. And yes, definitely the game usability book, which the second edition is gonna come out very soon, and I participated in it. So yeah, it's gonna be cool.
All right. Real quick because we're running out of time.
Yes.
Let's do a quick group photo. So I'm going to whip out my phone and I'm going to create. I'm gonna do a countdown. So real quick, I'll do like a 3, 2, 1. And we'll post this on Design Buddies Instagram. So ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Hi everyone, welcome to this talk with Celia. We're just about to kick off our game design, a game jam for Design Buddies 2021. We're really happy to see all of you here today, and we hope you have a great time. Thanks for coming.
Woohoo.
And that's everyone. Thank you all for coming. Stay tuned for the next part, which will be the design. I'm sorry, game design. The Design Buddies Game Jam kickoff, which will be hosted by Maggie, and that's coming up right now. And we want to also say thank you so much for Celia for your wonderful talk and presentation. And we hope that everyone learned a lot today, and we're looking forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank
care, everyone.
you. Have a great game jam. And
Thank
yeah, don't hesitate to book me if you have more questions. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I'm gonna